Hello and welcome to another episode of Finders Keepers, the podcast that helps you find the best keepers for your keeper and dynasty leagues. I'm your host Jordox, and round 18 of the AFL season was what I'm calling the Ruck Redemption Round. We had 6 Ruckmen ton up and another 2 scored in the 90s. It's been a tough scoring year for the Rucks thanks to the 5-man bench that was introduced and the highly used method of playing 2 fully fledged Ruckmen. Plus the new centre ball up rule, which has hurt some of the bigger and less nimble types. But this was the round the Rucks shone again. Tristan Xerri led the way, bouncing back with 146 on Friday night. Rowan Marshall continues to enjoy the solo spot with 134. That was matched by Kieran Briggs, who's been pretty underwhelming this year, but did as he pleased against the Ruck Easy Beats Geelong. Lloyd Meek relished the slop on a wet MCG on Saturday night with 129, while his Ruck partner Reeves remains injured. Darcy Cameron found his way again with 121, and Big Maxi Gawn took a back seat, only stumping up a lowly 104. Then it was the youngest of them, 24-year-old Ned Moyle, continuing to flex without old man Wits sharing the duties with a 93, and Sam Draper punched out a 92 against his old side in what was his best score in the Brisbane colours. Lockie McAndrew was on track to join the party with 83 at quarter time, but the Crows rested him in the last quarter. And Rory Lobb only holds defender status, but he hit his highest score since 2021 with 113 as the main ruckman for the Bulldogs. So is this the return of the ruckman returning to their high-scoring ways, or was round 18 just one out of the box with more stoppages than usual due to the wild rain we saw? We'll get a better idea next week, I suppose. My fantasy round was a mixed bag as usual. A few wins, a few losses. Had a great week in Classic for the first time for the year, I reckon. In my home league, Finders Keepers, those playing along at home will recall that I'm sitting in 5th spot, 1 game out of the final spots, and I've been sitting there for a very long time. And this week I was up against one of the very top sides, and I really thought I was a show in getting the win. I viced Cherry on Friday night and was feeling good, but got hit hard in the Giants Cats game. I was against Bailey Smith, Manor, Ash, Holmes. They all tunned, and even though I put up a very good score, I fell short. But the team in 4th also lost, so my finals dream lives on. For now. 3 rounds to go. On to the podcast now, and this week on Finders Keepers, I'm going to take a look back at the waiver wire pickups I suggested last week, see how they fared, give you a few names to look at for this week. Then I'll jump into the things I noticed across round 18, followed by some questions and trades sent in by you, the listener. We've got a few today, so it'll be good fun. So let's take a look now at the 3 names I put up in this segment last week as my waiver wire pickups. Just the 3 names last week. Let's see how we went. The first one was Jacob Van Rooyen, who was coming off a huge game the week before. This time last week, he was owned in 26% of leagues, keeper and dynasty leagues on the Keeper AFL platform. And I liked him. I've liked him in the past, but I liked him because I didn't think it was just a one out of the box type of score. And with Richmond and then North coming up, I thought he was a good option. First one was Richmond on the weekend, and he kicked another bag of 6 goals, scoring 117. So back-to-back tons for him, looking really, really good. And his ownership went up to 48%, and I dare say that's going to go up even more this week. The next guy was Bo Adensall for Gold Coast. He was owned in 46% of leagues. He'd scored an 86, had 26 touches in the middle, averaging 68 last week. Really like the look of him, like the opportunities he's getting in this Gold Coast midfield. And this week, his ownership only went up to 53%. And like the Suns, he struggled a little bit more this week. Still scored 66 in a game where, the Gold Coast midfield were very much beaten. So good signs, I think, that he could still get himself to a 66. And then the last guy I liked was Ed Allen for Collingwood. He was owned in 43% of leagues on the back of a couple of weeks scoring in the 80s. And this tagging role has brought him near the pill and given him lots of opportunities to tackle. And his ownership went up to 53%. And then he did again, 91, thanks to 11 tackles, tagging Davies Uniacke and absolutely shut him down too. So he's looking really good, Alan. So pretty good, I reckon, those three names. I think if you grabbed them, you'd be pretty happy with what you saw. But what about this week? Oh, I say this every week, but it is getting harder and harder to find these names. I'll give you a few names, though. The first one really stood out when I was researching this episode. Riley West at the Bulldogs. He's 26, has always been a great nuggety forward. I remember a few years ago thinking I'd love to see him in the midfield. And in this game, he was playing predominantly on the ball, in the guts. Scored 89. He's owned in 30% of leagues, obviously has his forward status. So I didn't watch this game, but I'm very interested. If they're going to experiment with him as a midfielder, I reckon he could be a real sneaky player to grab at the back end of this season. The next one I've got is someone I did a few weeks ago, but I'm just doing it again. Rory Lobb, only owned in 25% of leagues. Scored 113 with Tim English out of the side. But even last week when English played, Lobb was the main man. So unless English is fully fit, Lobb is a great option. Defender status, and just a short-term play. You're not going to keep him for next year, I wouldn't have thought. But someone that could score pretty well for you in the finals. Then I've got Harry Kyle from Sydney, who he's owned in 37% of leagues, so people are aware of him. He's only 5 games into his career, but he scored 62 in this game against Freo, and a few times seeing him on the night, he just really stood out to me. He looks like he's going to be a prime mover and a really good scorer down the track. And yeah, it could be worth a late season pickup as well. And then the last one, it's 2 players. It's who's going to take the spot left by the Zach Butters injury, and then for this week, the Horne-Francis suspension. I've actually got a question on that later to look at, but I'll give you these 2 names. If you get any word on who's going to be in, these guys are very interesting. Will Brodie, owned in 21% of leagues, or Jack Watkins, owned in 10% of leagues. Both of them have been putting up some pretty big numbers in the SANFL. I reckon one of them will find their way into the side this week. So let's look at the things I noticed across round 18. It was a good round of footy, some pretty good games, but the thing that stood out was the weather. I mean, some of the rain we saw across the round, particularly Saturday night at the G, Carlton Hawthorn, was crazy. But the round started Thursday night with a very entertaining game between the top 2 sides, Fremantle and Sydney. Both sides had their chances, but Freo just were... Well, actually, it was pretty close till the end, and then Freo put their foot down with 10 minutes to go and just went bang, 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 bang. They are looking fair dinkum, the Dockers. Fair dinkum indeed. But from a fantasy point of view, Matt Johnson scored 79, and he saw some additional centre ball up action with Hayden Young out once again. And it's probably just a broken record with Johnson. When he gets that inside look, he's a player I'm quite interested in. But when everyone's fit in that Freo midfield, he goes back to the wing and back to the outside. So might be the sort of guy that if he... I'm not sure this is a chance, but if he ended up at a different club or, one of the Freo mids moved on, I'm not sure. But he's got a fantasy game. He's very similar to Erasmus as well. They've both got fantasy games, but just can't nail the inside role. Now, Murphy Reid just continues to shine. Scored 96 in this game. I'll tell you how good this kid's going. Second-year player. The James Jordan tag moved from Andy Brayshaw to Murphy Reid at three-quarter time. Such was his impact with every touch that he has. Absolutely flying. For Sydney, Charlie Curnow really impressed and has impressed in recent weeks. Scored 101. Had a slowish start as a Swan, start of the year. But he's flying now. His third quarter in this game, he scored 50 points, kicked a few goals. His third quarter was so dominant. It was one of the better quarters I've seen from a forward this year. He was really impressive. Friday night footy saw North Melbourne playing on a Friday night for the first time in a long time, which is interesting. Didn't they champion Friday night footy in the 90s? Anyway, Collingwood and North, great game and a really good game of footy. The first two games of this round were excellent, and North, fell agonisingly short of what would have been an important win for them. But the Pies, they had to get the win themselves, and they did in a nail-biter. For Collingwood, Josh Dacos off half-back has been a great fantasy guy for us. He actually put up a career-high score in this game, 144, and he actually didn't take any kick-ins to get there. He just racked it up all over the ground and just played that freewheeling role. Great score from him. Darcy Cameron, fantastic return to scoring form for him. He had 26 touches, 6 tackles, 27 hit-outs and a goal to score 121 in a fantastic battle against Tristan Sherry. And welcome back, X-Man. 146. Thank you. It was really interesting. I'd heard during the week that there was a bit more info on Cherry's why he wasn't used in the ruck as much and that he was carrying an injury. And then this game just went bang. It was his highest CBA percentage since round 9 and his biggest ruck split percentage since round 8. He had 22 touches, 7 tackles, 32 hit-outs and a goal, and hopefully is the main man once again. Jai Simpkin played on the ball, but I don't think he was tagging this time. 32 touches, 5 tackles, 121. Just a bit of a case of what if, for Jai Simpkin as a fantasy stud. He had a couple of years in the 90s. He averaged in the 90s a few years ago, I think, but he just hasn't had the role last couple of years at North. And I do wonder what would have happened if he left the Roos and found himself at a club that played in midfield more. But anyway, for those with him, the forward status is very nice, and 121. It's a great score to get from him. On to Saturday, and the early game was St Kilda against Port Adelaide at Marvel. And St Kilda have been absolutely scoring out of their minds the last few weeks. Another 7 tons in this game with a heap of marks once again. A very high-scoring fantasy side at the minute, the Sainers. Mateus Filippo, he backed up his really good score last week with a 117, thanks to 10 marks, 7 tackles. Just great to see him get that midfield role again. It's 2 weeks he's been back and 2 weeks in the midfield. 2 very good scores. Mason Wood, he's gone a little under the radar, I reckon. He scored 111, but that's actually 3 tons in a row for Wood. Playing on the wing, taking lots of marks. Took 12 marks in this game, 10 and 11 the weeks before. And I could go through a lot of the Sainers, Brad Hill, Wangadeen Miller, all these guys are racking up the marks and putting up these big scores. For Port Adelaide, Jace Burgoyne, he's been chipping away quietly, I reckon. He's now averaging 83 and hasn't gone under 70 since round 8. He scored 95 in this game, spending his time on a wing, a little bit at halfback, even a little bit of time in the middle. And I think he's building really nicely. It's been a good year for him. Miles Bergman, in his second game back, scored really well in a nice interceptor role at halfback. He scored 92. There's a vacancy in that midfield, though, with Butters and Horne-Francis to miss next week. And I wonder if they consider Bergman in there. You know, maybe he could run with a Sarong or Brayshaw this week. Anyway, more on that later. That's one of the listener questions. That's it from that game. The Saturday twilight was GWS and Geelong over in Sydney, and Geelong had this game pretty much won, I thought, and then got struck down by some pretty bad injuries, ran out of gas, and Giants overran them, and very big win for GWS. Kieran Briggs, 134, huge game against the Cats, who decided to omit their only sort of ruckman and used a combination of Blitzarves, Sam De Conning and Shannon Neal as the rucks. Anyway, Briggs didn't mind it. 51 hitouts for him, which showed his dominance, but he had 19 touches, kicked a really important goal too, and impacted the game. Finn Callaghan saved his score with a big last quarter. He ended up on 84, but he struggled to get involved thanks to the Ocean Mullen tag, and he was actually moved out of the middle in the second half to shake the tag, which is something we saw a few weeks ago, not necessarily to shake a tag, but just to mix it up. They sent him to half back, so perhaps that was the idea, get him used to some other roles, so if he's copping the tag, they can move him around. For Geelong, as I said, they had 3 different ruckmen in the centre ball ups, and they used 10 different non-ruck players at centre ball ups as well. So they were trying everything in this game. Max Holmes continued his recent midfield role. I reckon Tom Stewart's return the last couple of weeks has allowed Holmes to be more midfield and less of half back. He scored 118 and he's just a gun, isn't he? And Jeremy Cameron, he's at the moment sitting equal 6th in the Coleman medal, but in this game he was played behind the ball, like entirely behind the ball. It was a great role, fantasy-wise. He took 11 marks and scored really well, scored 96 without even kicking a goal. But unfortunately, he smashed his shoulder in that big hit with Oliver, and he's going to be out for a while now. The first game on Saturday night was Carlton versus Hawthorn. I watched the first quarter of this game, and then the Crows game started, and the rain that was coming down in this game, I mean, I was sitting at home watching, and the rain on the roof of my house was so loud, I thought my roof was going to cave in. I couldn't fathom being outside in that rain, running and chasing and getting tackled, and yeah, it was trying conditions, to say the least. And Carlton fell to their first loss under Josh Fraser. Unfortunately for them, Hawthorn, well, they were just too slick in the wet, weren't they? And won it comfortably. So some interesting things did come out of this game. For Carlton, Adam Chera has moved out of the midfield this year and played, I think, more on a wing, maybe even a bit of halfback, but he was moved back into the middle for this game because George Hewitt went down fairly early, and this was Chera's first CBA since round 10, and he had 27 touches, 14 tackles and a goal for 135. So his biggest score for a very long time. And obviously playing midfield helped. Obviously the 14 tackles in the wet also helped. So I wonder what Carlton do next week. I think Chera plays on the ball myself. I think that's where he's best suited. So yeah, I reckon we'll see him back in there for a little bit. Flynn Riley made his debut. I think he's one of many mid-season draftees getting a gig, and it was a very impressive debut when you consider the conditions, because he's very big. I reckon he'd be nearly 210 centimetres, very tall, and yeah, so he was in to cover the Pitnett injury, and yeah, I thought he played pretty well up against Meek. Scored 65, kicked a great snap goal out of the ruck, I think it was, or around a stoppage. He just picked it up, snapped it over his head. Very impressive from the big man. For Hawthorn, it was the other big man, Lloyd Meek, who's got a couple of weeks without Reeves now, and as a meek owner myself, it's been a sight for sore eyes to see him leading the ruck line. And yeah, he had a massive game. Conditions suited him really well. The lots of stoppages, lots of tackling opportunities, lots of hit-out opportunities. And yeah, scored 129, 49 hit-outs, 10 tackles. Great result there. Blake Hardwick continues to score well now that he's back in defence. He's averaging 97 in his last 3, scored 89 in this game. And I think the role will continue, particularly with the news that Carl Amon is injured and I think he's out for a little bit. So, yeah, Hardwick in the back line. He's a pretty underrated pick, I reckon, for a keeper. The other Saturday night game was Adelaide and Gold Coast. And, yeah, this was supposed to be a pretty good game, but Adelaide got going early and, yeah, Gold Coast just sort of wilted under the... I don't know. They looked like they gave up in the second half. It was very surprising. I thought it would be much closer. The Sun season very much on the line, but as a Crows fan, I will take it. Very nice to see Adelaide play 4 quarters of footy. For the Crows, Braden Cook had a nice bounce back after 2 very quiet weeks. He scored 81 and he just sort of does that, doesn't he? He just sort of scores 80s, every other week. And yeah, he's pretty handy with that forward status. Really interesting decision coming up for those who delist. Does he stay on your squad when he loses that forward status next year? Because as a mid only, playing on the wing, I'm not sure. Anyway, it's been great to see him break out this year. Dan Curtin, nice to see a good score from him. He scored 82 thanks to 8 tackles playing on the wing. But still no midfield time, still no CBAs for him. I've been waiting for the Crows to pull that lever and stick him in there and see how he goes. But I wonder if I think last year they saved it and did it in finals and he just wasn't ready for it. So I would have rathered see a bit more of it in the season to this point. But Crows midfield were great on the night, so I will not complain. For Gold Coast, Christian Petrarca's in the middle of a very quiet patch at the minute. He scored 65 in this game. He's played much more forward the last 2 weeks, and I'm not sure what the reason for that is, but they've just got to find a way to get him going again. He has to be unleashed in the middle again for the Suns to get going. I mean, remember his form at the start of the year when he first got there. I remember thinking he was a Brownlow chance, but yeah, it's sort of fallen away. They've got to find a way to get him in there and get him firing. Touk Miller was more forward again this week after he had a really big uptick in the CBAs last week. And then Will Powell was used at CBAs for the first time since round 5. He scored 69 and was okay, but just shows Gold Coast are really flicking those magnets around, trying to find something to get that season going again. On to Sunday footy, and we had 3 games, starting with the Bulldogs and West Coast at Marvel. And geez, West Coast gave the Dogs an almighty fright. They were ahead for large parts of this game, but Bulldogs did what they had to late and got the win. Really good signs for the Eagles, and I'm sure their fans are sick of hearing about, honourable losses, but yeah, to push the Doggies at Marvel shows they're on the right track. For the Dogs themselves, Riley West, I spoke about him in my waiver segment, 73% of the CBAs this week. Inside midfield role. 23 touches, 6 tackles, scored 89. And I wonder if it was just this week to cover Riley Sanders, who was out. Liberatore and Kennedy had less CBAs this week than the week before. So I'm not sure what is happening there, but I'm very interested to see, because if West is playing that role again this week, very interested. Rory Lobb, the ruck lobster, I call him, scored 113 with English out of the side. This guy is just super relevant, even at his age. The defender status, and yeah, he's just playing really good footy. For West Coast, not a lot. Ollie Franco in his second game, He couldn't get involved early, but real credit to him. He got going in the second half and ended up scoring 66, which is, really impressive. I think he was on 0 at quarter time and then, a few touches in the second, had a big second half. So great signs for him after his super impressive debut last week. Melbourne and Richmond was the middle game over at the G, and as sort of I seem to say every week with the Richmond games, the Tigers hung around, had a bit of a go and just weren't good enough, and Melbourne won easily in the end. But the Tigers, I don't know, I feel like they rarely get blown out of the water. They're always sort of in an arm wrestle and then they fall away. For Melbourne, Joel Fitzgerald, just his 4th game of footy and his first fantasy ton, 106 thanks to 31 disposals, and he was actually my cover on the field in Classic this week. So Fitzgerald, thank you very much, sir. Jake Bowie scored 129. That was his first ton for the year, but he's been super consistent since returning to the side in round 9. He's only dropped under 80 once, and he's averaging 91 now. Very impressive season considering how much footy he missed. And with guys like Christian Salem still out of the side, it's his backline to just rack it up, Bowie. And then the last game of the round, Sunday twilight, was Brisbane and Essendon at the Gabba, or as it's sometimes referred to, the Gabbatoir, and it was very much an appropriate name for this game. It was a procession. Brisbane absolutely destroyed them. I think to three-quarter time, Essendon had only kicked 1 goal and were, I think, 90-something points down. They found something in the last quarter, thankfully, and kicked 6 goals, Essendon, in the last quarter. Anyway, massive win for Brisbane. Essendon, very non-competitive, disappointing, and fantasy scores absolutely reflected that. Lachie Neale had an absolute whopper, 153, but I want to talk about Will Ashcroft. He had a massive last quarter to get another whopping score, 142, and that's 4 weeks in a row now he's gone over 120, and I think 3 of them over 130 maybe. So it's just interesting because I thought Ashcroft was going to be a gun and a fantasy star, but I wondered what the ceiling was for him, if he was going to be a guy that could hit those big scores, and absolutely proven it this year. What a season he's having. Sam Draper put up a 92, best score in Brisbane colours for him, and did it from only 59% time on ground, which is pretty impressive. Kicked a couple of goals, including an absolute ripper and maybe a nomination for Goal of the Year. It's probably worth talking a little bit about Draper and the season he's had, trying to sort of work out how we rate it. He's averaged 63, which is obviously unders and what I guess expectations would have been from owners who carried him over the summer. But when you consider that he came to Brisbane recovering from a ruptured Achilles, and then early days he actually had a slight break in his foot, so broken foot on the back of an Achilles, and he only missed opening round. So he's played every game from round 1, hasn't missed a game, played 16 games, and I think with Draper, the most important thing in him developing into a great ruck for Brisbane, but for us, a great fantasy player, is the continuity in his game and playing week in, week out. So I think it's been a good body of work. His average of 63 is a little unders, but I reckon he's building nicely, and next year he's going to be a great player to have. I think he becomes the out-and-out number 1 ruck at Brisbane, with Fort dropping back a little bit, maybe even out of the side. He's only 27, so approaching his prime ruck years. The only question is, does he keep forward status? That would be a real gift for owners. Not sure he does, but I think he's going to be a really good player for Brisbane and for fantasy. Over to the Bombers, and it wasn't a good day for them. Zach Merritt scored 35 from basically a full game, and I just wanted to go back and look over his career and see the last time he scored so bad in a game that he wasn't injured or subbed. And I found out he's actually never scored that bad before. This was the first time in his career, in a game where he's not injured or subbed, that he scored under 40 in a game, which obviously speaks to how good he was from the very start of his career, Barrett, but also how bad this game was. I think he was half back and then middle, and then I think they even sort of put him in the forward line at times. Just a real dirty day for the Bombers and their former captain. One positive, though, I reckon, Jai Caldwell only scored 67, but it's just good signs to see him back in the midfield. And he was actually the most used Essendon midfielder at CBAs this week. And in his last few games, sort of coming back from all those injuries, he sort of played a bit more forward. But he's probably been the biggest disappointment of the fantasy season, just for the high hopes owners would have had last summer heading into this year. I mean, I thought he had the ability to be the number one scoring midfielder in the game, let alone at Essendon. It's just been a shocking year for him. So owners who are still holding on to him, good signs to see him back in the middle. Hopefully he can finish the year with some nice scores and just bring some optimism for 2027. And that's what I noticed across round 18 from a Keeper League perspective, of course. We'll jump into some questions from the listeners now before I wrap up another episode of Finders Keepers. Before I do that, though, just a reminder, if you are enjoying the podcast, please make sure you've liked and subscribed wherever you're listening. And if you're feeling so inclined, leave us a 5-star review while you're there. You can reach out to me on X at FindKeepAFL. Make sure you've liked that page and follow to keep up with everything that's happening on the podcast, and use that as a way to communicate and get in touch with me and send through any questions you've got about keeper leagues, single season draft, anything fantasy, anything footy. And of course, my favourite, any trades that have gone through in your leagues and you want me to review them on the pod. So let's jump into it then. The first one is from David Bray on X. And this is brutal. It's always brutal when you do a very big trade and then one of the pieces of that trade gets injured. Always hard to take. So Dave wrote in last week before the weekend. He says, "Hey mate, seeking some advice on a big trade offer in my Dynasty League from a contender, and I'm rebuilding." He sends Blamires, Billy Dowling, 6th round pick in 2027, and then a 1st and a 2nd round pick from 2028 in exchange for Dangerfield, George Hewitt, and a 5th rounder in 2027. It's an 18-team league with 38 players. And then a few days later, he said, "In case you do use this on the pod, we did this trade, and now Hewitt might be out for the season." So brutal for the guy that brought in George Hewitt, because it does sound like he's got a back injury that could keep him out. But let's look at the trade itself and try and work out how it looks. So it's Blamires and Dowling for Dangerfield, George Hewitt. And then the picks, I mean, there's some really nice picks going your way, Dave. You've got a 6th rounder next year. And then for the following year, you've got the 1st and 2nd round. And you've only given up a 5th round in next year's. So I think you've done really, really well. Dangerfield has shown he can score and has the forward status. George Hewitt's the big piece in this trade that is obviously what this guy was looking for to help him contend and get a flag this year. But I think he's given up too much for a George Hewitt. Blamires and Dowling, I'd love the idea of them in a dynasty, that you just hold on to them and see what happens. Blamires has showed a bit, I reckon, at halfback this year, in his first year. And Billy Dowling, I think, is going to be a great player. It just might not be at the Crows. He may find he has to go to another club to get his opportunity. And then, you've got those the 1st rounder and a 2nd rounder. I think you've done really well in this trade, Dave. Not because Hewitt got injured a few days later, but I like the players you brought in, and I think the picks you brought in far outweigh the value of what you've given up. And a great time to sell a George Hewitt, not because of his injury, obviously, but because he was in such great form, putting out those big scores. And sometimes you want to strike while the iron is hot. So it's a great trade you've pulled off. Bad luck to your mate who brought in Hewitt. It's just the way it goes, though. Thanks for sending it in, Dave. Appreciate the support, mate. Speaking of support, at Nzajak2, who's sending lots into me this year. Really appreciate it, mate. And there's a trade here. So this league, have got 8 teams, 40-man squad. They delist 10 at the end of the year and no waivers. So that's the context of the league. The trade itself was Clayton Oliver for Hayden Young and a second-round pick. Clayton Oliver for Hayden Young and a second-round pick. Geez, that's interesting, isn't it? I wonder what the age gap actually is between Clary and Young. Young is 25 now. And what's Oliver? He's not 30 yet, is he? He's 28 still. All right, so Oliver at 28 for Young, who's 25 and a second round. Oliver's looked bloody good, hasn't he, in the orange? He's had a great season. And Hayden Young, I just don't know if it's ever going to happen for him. He just keeps getting injured. And the other concern with Young is even when he's not injured and fully fit, is he going to be a guy that can average over 100, or is he going to be a real nice 90 to 95 guy? I'm not convinced he'll be over 100, and Oliver's found his form again. So second round pick. Now, I reckon the guy that got Clayton Oliver in this deal absolutely wins it. A second round pick in Hayden Young, who, yeah, the potential's still there, but time's ticking. I think it's a great trade, and you've done really well to get Oliver. Great trade. Thanks for sending it through, mate. Appreciate it, as always. All right, got a couple of questions here from Matthew Robinson on X. The first one is a good question. With Butters now down, who gets the uptick? Wines, Richards, Burgoyne? It's a good question, Matt. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what they do, because not only is Butters out likely for the season, but Horne-Francis got suspended for a week. So there's a real opening in that midfield. Now, Ollie Wines has sort of been in there 50% CBAs last few weeks. I'm not sure that goes up. I think they maintain his role. Joe Richards is someone that's had a lot of midfield time this year, and that's sort of gone back a little bit in recent weeks. I think we'll see him get a bit more time in there. Jace Burgoyne has had little bits and pieces in there. I'm not sure if that'll go up too much. And then I'm looking at the Sandful and who they bring in as probably the biggest player to get the uptick. And I think Will Brodie definitely fits the bill. He brings the hardness that, you know, Butters and Horne-Francis have. It's just whether or not they're going to give him a go, Brodie. He got one game this year with very minimal time on ground, and that was it. And then the other one is Jack Watkins, who, you know, you'll remember him from earlier in the year. He looked pretty good when he came in and then faded and found his way out of the side. So lots of names, and I'll throw another one at you. I talked about him earlier, but Miles Bergman, he's 2 games back now, playing halfback. It would be a bit of a risk to throw him into the midfield so soon after returning from his injuries, but I liked him as a midfielder last year. He was able to play run-with roles. So I could see him going into the midfield this week and maybe playing a bit of a cooler role on a Brayshaw or a Sarong or a Murphy Reid. So, yeah, Matt, I've given you a lot of names there. How do I actually think it'll fall? I think one of Will Brodie or Jack Watkins comes in and picks up a large part of it. I think Richards gets more, and I think Bergman gets a little bit, just a bit of a look this week. So, yeah, plenty of opportunities down at Alberton in the midfield this week. And Matt's other question is simply, is Filippo back? So it's a great question, and I think with Matheus Filippo, I don't know if he's back because I don't think he ever truly arrived. He had a wonderful 4-week run at the end of 2024 where he looked amazing, and then injuries have just sort of ravaged him ever since. So I don't think he's back, but I think he's close to arriving officially. So I looked at some numbers on Filippo. He's played 59 games in his career. This is his 4th season. In his career, he's played 4 games where he's attended over 50% centre ball ups. And he averages 101 in those 4 games. Very small sample size, I know. But if they continue with him as a midfielder, he's going to be, and he stays fit and can avoid those injuries, he's going to be brilliant. So I don't think he's back as such, Matt. I think he's very close to arriving, and I can't wait to see what the last 6-7 rounds of this season look like for him. Saints might make finals, but you know what I mean. I just want to see him play the next block of games in the middle, injury-free, and I think he'll arrive. So he's not back, but he's nearly here. Good question. Both good questions, actually. Thanks, Matt. And hopefully I've answered them adequately. Now, the last question isn't actually sent in by anyone. It's from a mate of mine. You'll know him from the Fantasy Fanatics at Taser87 on X. He's a good man. He's a Freo man. So he's up and about. And his keeper league trade looked like this, and he wanted to ask me about it. So Taser sends Sam Lawler and a 1st-round pick in exchange for Marcus Bontempelli and a 3rd-round pick. And I think initially it was just going to be Lawler and the 1st round for Bont on his own. And yeah, Taser asked me what I thought. I did say try and get a pick back. He's done really well to get a 3rd round back. But yeah, looking at Taser's list to sort of get a feel for whether or not Lawler for Bont makes sense, he's actually got a pretty strong side considering he is quote-unquote rebuilding. He's got guys like Nick Martin to come back in next year. McInerney's another one that stood out who's out injured at the minute. It's a decent squad and there's plenty of youth. And I think it's a perfect trade for Taser's side to bring in a captain option to help bring the whole side up next year. And, giving up Sam Lawler, it's a bit tough. And I think with Lawler, I actually gave up on him. Not gave up, but traded him out in a keeper I'm in end of last year. And I think with Lawler, it's just going to be a very slow burn. It'll be similar to what we're seeing with Horn Francis. Took a few years and he's starting to get there now. But these players, I think like of a Dustin Martin and a Paddy Dangerfield, who took a very long time to be really good in fantasy and then only really had a few massive years at the top. Danger had more, but I know Dusty only had a few years of like that top end fantasy scoring. And I think Lawler's going to be the same. You're going to want to have him when he has that run, but to get Bontempelli in, who's still absolutely at the top of his game and showing no signs of slowing down, I think it's a really good deal for Taze. Like I said, I look at Bont and I don't have the same sort of nervousness I'd have with like a Josh Dunkley last year. Like getting towards that age of 30, the role might start to shift. The Dogs are going to keep bringing in the younger midfield brigade, but Bont is still very much the number one man and will be for a few years yet, and then we'll probably end up with forward status and being a really handy forward to have anyway. So yeah, I think Taze did really well in the trade. I think the other guy, depending on what else he's got on his squad, to give up Bont is a lot, but bringing in Lawler and a 1st rounder is pretty good. So it feels like a real win-win, this trade. Just depending on where those squads are at in their development. But for me, if I had to be on one side of the coin here, I'd be taking Bont in the 3rd round pick for sure. So thank you to everyone who sent in questions this week. If you've got a question or a trade you'd like analysed on the podcast next week, hit me up on X at FindKeepAFL. And that brings us to the end of another episode of Finders Keepers. Thank you for listening. Hopefully you got a lot out of it and are well prepared for round 19, which kicks off in just a few days' time. Most leagues will only have 3 rounds left before fantasy finals begin. So good luck for this round and the run-in, and hopefully you are charging towards a tilt at the ultimate glory, a Keeper League Premiership. I'll be back again next week to make sense of everything to come in round 19, but in the meantime, I'm Jordox, this has been Finders Keepers, and until next time, keep on keeping on.